Brothers and sisters, let me take you to a moment on the edge of the desert, where sandstorms swallow villages and the wind itself seems to mock survival. One evening, Captain Ibrahim Traore stood before his people and spoke words that shook the nation. "We shall plant 5 million vines along the frontier where the desert meets the steppe. 5 million vines, grapevines, in a land where even sorghum struggles to grow." To many, it sounded like madness. To others, it was defiance wrapped in green leaves. This was not merely agriculture. It was prophecy. It was a declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer bow to the creeping sands, nor let the world define it as barren. It was a vision so bold it demanded not only labor but faith. For when a leader asks his people to plant vines in the desert and steppe, he is not only planting roots, he is planting dignity, sovereignty, and destiny. And before we walk deeper into this extraordinary journey, I ask you, if you believe stories like this must be told, then subscribe to this channel. Join me as we uncover how a dream that seemed impossible is rewriting the history of a nation. Brothers and sisters, let us pause and remember the condition of the land before the vision was spoken. Burkina Faso, our beloved Sahelian nation, had been locked in a losing battle with the desert. Every year, thousands of hectares disappeared under creeping dunes. Villages were swallowed, fields became dust, and families who once tilled the soil with hope were driven into cities by despair. Desertification was not only a matter of ecology, it was humiliation. It was the desert whispering, "You are powerless." International agencies came with their promises. Expensive irrigation schemes, imported seeds, endless seminars in air-conditioned halls. Yet the land continued to die. The people continued to hunger. The desert did not respect reports written in foreign languages. It respected only roots, only shade, only resilience planted in the ground. It was into this silence, this despair, that Captain Ibrahim Traore stepped, not as a politician speaking softly, but as a commander declaring a new front line. In a cabinet meeting, his words were simple yet thunderous. "If we cannot hold the desert, we cannot hold our nation." And so he declared the impossible. Burkina Faso would plant 5 million grapevines along the frontier where the desert and steppe collide. Grapes! Not millet, not sorghum, not maize, but grapes. The fruit of Mediterranean valleys, of Parisian feasts, of Italian vineyards. To many, it was a statement so outrageous that even his closest advisors sat in stunned silence. "Grapes?" they whispered. "Here, where even hardy sorghum fails?" Some laughed nervously, others shook their heads in disbelief. But Traoré was not merely speaking of fruit. He was speaking of identity. Listen carefully, his strategy had 3 layers. First, the ecological layer. Vines, when guided by trellises and sustained with careful irrigation, can drive their roots deep into the soil, holding it against erosion. Their leaves spread shade, slowing evaporation, protecting life beneath. A green belt of vines, stretching mile after mile, could stand as a living wall against the advance of the desert. Second, the nutritional layer. Grapes offer not only sweetness, but vitamins and antioxidants. Fresh fruit for children. Raisins stored for lean seasons. In a land where nutrition often meant survival, grapes were both food and medicine. Third, the economic layer. Brothers and sisters, let us not forget, the world spends over $40 billion a year on wine. France, Italy, Spain, South Africa, all exporting to the globe. Africa's Sahel, meanwhile, is written off as barren. But what if Burkina Faso could take even a fraction of that market? Not as a beggar of grain, but as a producer of wine? Traoré saw not only survival, but sovereignty, an industry that could rival gold and cotton, one that belonged to the people. The order was given, and across the nation the mobilization began. Youth brigades marched, not with rifles, but with shovels. Women's cooperatives were handed seedlings to nurture. The army itself laid down weapons and picked up watering cans. Schools sent children to sing songs about vines of hope. From Ouagadougou to the farthest frontier, families carried cuttings, dug trenches, and tied tender shoots to rough wooden stakes. This was no ordinary project. It was not agriculture alone. It was revolution. Every vine planted was a declaration of war against the desert. Every trench dug was a line of defense for sovereignty. And yet as the sun beat down and the sands shifted in the wind, a question lingered like a storm on the horizon. Could vines truly live in this place? Could green walls rise where for generations there had been only dust? Because brothers and sisters, planting is one thing. Surviving is another. And the desert does not yield easily. And so the nation planted with trembling hands and beating hearts. But the question remained, would the vines endure the wrath of the desert, or would hope wither before it had a chance to grow? Brothers and sisters, when the first seedlings touched the soil, the world did not believe. Farmers looked at the tiny green shoots and asked, how can such fragile things survive under this merciless sun? Ministers worried about costs. Foreign observers mocked the project, calling it fantasy viticulture, a fool's dream on the edge of the Sahara. The desert itself seemed to laugh. Sandstorms roared across the plains, burying trenches before the vines could root. Goats chewed through tender shoots, undoing days of labor in a single night. Irrigation lines cracked in the blistering heat. The Sahel is not kind to dreamers. But hear me, Traoré did not retreat. He reframed every obstacle as part of the struggle. When vines wilted in the sun, he declared, "If they survive, we survive." When irrigation kits broke, he sent soldiers not to patrol borders but to repair water systems, turning the army into guardians of seedlings. Every problem became a parable of resilience. Every setback was transformed into proof that the nation must endure. And slowly something extraordinary happened. What began as doubt became duty. What began as skepticism became song. Youth brigades worked day and night, singing hymns of vines as they dug. Women's cooperatives carried water in clay pots, saying, "Each drop is a prayer for our children." Farmers who once scoffed at grapes began to whisper with cautious pride, maybe this is possible. Beyond the borders, the reactions multiplied. In Morocco and Tunisia, agronomists traveled south, curious to see this bold experiment. Mali pledged to test smaller vineyards along its frontier. Ghana offered technical support for wine production. Across Africa, whispers spread, "If Burkina Faso dares, why not us?" But in the West, the laughter continued. Newspapers sneered, "Wine in the desert? A vanity project." Development agencies, embarrassed by their own failures, dismissed the campaign as unsustainable. Economists wrote reports declaring it doomed. They could not see the faith behind the roots nor the fire behind the vines. Yet Traoré understood psychology. He knew that grapes were more than plants. Grapes were symbols. In scripture, they are signs of blessing. In history, they are marks of civilization. By planting grapes in the desert and steppe, he was telling his people, "We are not condemned to be beggars of grain. We are growers of prosperity." And so the campaign became more than farming. It became ritual. Villagers painted murals of vines strangling sand dunes. Children recited poems about green walls rising against the desert. Songs spread through the markets. Songs not of hunger, but of resilience. Even skeptics could not resist the rhythm of hope that was taking root. But brothers and sisters, let us not pretend the risks were small. Water remained scarce. Many seedlings died before they could establish themselves. Markets were uncertain. If the gamble failed, the ridicule would be merciless. International donors were ready to say, "We told you so." Traoré himself admitted in a council meeting, "The greater risk is doing nothing. If we fail as dreamers. But if we do nothing, we fail as slaves to inevitability." These words echoed far beyond the cabinet walls. They ignited something deep within the people. Farmers who had once seen only sand now looked at their vines as soldiers. Every leaf was a flag. Every root was a border. The desert was no longer an enemy to fear. It was a battlefield on which they could fight. And then the miracle approached. After months of scorching sun and violent winds, small clusters began to appear on a fraction of the vines. Tiny green berries, fragile but undeniable. Villagers gathered in disbelief, staring at what seemed impossible. Some touched the grapes as if to confirm they were real. Elders wept, whispering, "We never thought we would see this in our lifetime." The harvest was not abundant. Out of 5 million vines, only a fraction bore fruit in that first cycle. Yet what mattered was not the quantity. It was the fact that grapes had ripened at all on the frontier of the Sahara. It was proof that Traoré's gamble was not madness but vision. And so, in the dust of the Sahel, the first grapes of Burkina Faso were born. But this was only the beginning. The world watched closely. Would this fragile miracle grow into a revolution, or vanish like dew under the desert sun? Brothers and sisters, let us stand at that moment of revelation, the day when the first grapes ripened on Burkinabè soil. They were few in number, small in size, not the polished clusters of Bordeaux or Tuscany. Yet when the people saw them, they did not see imperfections. They saw prophecy fulfilled. They saw dignity made visible in the skin of a grape. Villagers gathered around baskets of fruit as though they were sacred offerings. Children touched them with awe. Elders shook their heads in disbelief, whispering, "We thought the desert had silenced us, yet here is fruit singing from the sand." For decades, Burkina Faso had been portrayed as a victim of drought, a nation defined by scarcity. Now, with just a handful of grapes, that image cracked open. The impossible had been proven possible. And so the people celebrated. A festival was declared, the festival of the first harvest. Grapes were paraded through Ouagadougou like trophies of sovereignty. Farmers wore wreaths of vine leaves. Women's cooperatives baked sweetbreads filled with raisins. Children sang songs of vines of hope. Artists painted murals across city walls, green vines strangling sand dunes, grapes blossoming where once only dust had reigned. Do you see, brothers and sisters? Even before the vineyards grew strong, the idea had already borne fruit. Pride replaced resignation. Hope replaced despair. The desert was no longer an undefeatable enemy. It was now a stage upon which resilience could perform. Economically, the ripples began. Women's cooperatives dried raisins and sold them in local markets. Diaspora communities in Paris and New York paid double for bottles of grape juice branded Vin du Sahel, not because of taste, but because of meaning. The first experimental wineries opened near Bobo Dioulasso, staffed with young agronomists trained in Morocco and Tunisia. Their wines were rough, raw, unrefined. But as Traoré declared, "We are not drinking for flavor, we are drinking for sovereignty." The psychological harvest, however, was the greatest of all. For generations, Burkinabè farmers had been told their land was barren, their only role to beg for aid or to migrate. But when they tasted grapes grown on their own desert frontier, something shifted deep in the soul. They began to call themselves vineyard keepers, not subsistence farmers. Youth who once dreamed only of leaving now spoke of becoming winemakers, tour guides, exporters. Yet let us not ignore the shadows. The desert did not surrender overnight. Many vines still died in the heat. Irrigation kits broke under strain. Sandstorms buried seedlings. Critics abroad mocked the celebration, calling it premature. Some in the nation worried. Are we celebrating too soon? What if the vines fail next year? But Traoré knew that in politics, perception often comes before production. By celebrating even a modest harvest, he amplified the idea that Burkina Faso was no longer a passive victim, but a daring pioneer. The image of grapes ripening in the desert was stronger than any statistic. It was a narrative that could not be erased. And that narrative spread. Across Africa, people looked to Burkina Faso not as a symbol of drought, but as a source of inspiration. Mali, Niger, and Senegal began experimenting with vineyards along their own desert frontiers. The phrase Traoré's vines became shorthand for attempting the impossible. But the greatest transformation happened inside the hearts of ordinary Burkinabè. They began to believe that they could fight destiny itself, that they were not condemned to be erased by sand, but chosen to plant roots that would hold against the storm. And so the harvest came, not only of grapes, but of pride, of identity, of sovereignty. Yet the world asked, was this miracle sustainable or only a season's dream? Tell me, my friends, do you believe a handful of grapes can change the destiny of a nation? Brothers and sisters, while Burkina Faso rejoiced in its first fruits, the eyes of the world were watching. And oh, how divided those eyes were. In the West, many could not hide their unease. For decades, Africa's story had been written in reports of hunger, aid, and dependency. Yet here was a nation scarred by drought, daring to plant vineyards where even hope seemed to die. Newspapers in Paris and London ran headlines with a mocking tone. Wine at the edge of the Sahara? Aid agencies, embarrassed by their own failed projects, scrambled to reframe the success as part of their climate initiatives, though in truth they had dismissed it from the beginning. Economists on American television shook their heads, warning of market illusions. And yet beneath the mockery there was fascination. When images of Burkinabè children holding grapes went viral, when clips of farmers raising baskets of fruit spread across social media, the tone began to shift. What had seemed laughable was now inspiring. Environmentalists in New York praised the Greenbelt as a grassroots model for climate resilience. African diaspora communities in Atlanta and Brooklyn proudly bought bottles of Vin du Sahel, not only for taste but for identity. This, they said, is our homeland daring to dream. Across Africa, the response was even stronger. In Mali, small vineyards were planted along the desert frontier. In Senegal, grapevines were woven into the Great Green Wall Initiative. In Ghana, technicians offered training for wine bottling. Morocco, a veteran of viticulture in arid climates, sent teams of agronomists south to advise. The continent was stirred. If Burkina Faso could plant 5 million vines in the desert and steppe, then perhaps Africa itself could rise as a vineyard of resilience. But with this continental admiration came global tension. Western corporations circled like vultures, eager to control exports, to brand Burkinabè wine under foreign labels. Yet Traoré refused. We will export wine, he declared, but we will not export sovereignty. His defiance echoed across Africa, winning him admiration in the streets of Dakar, Nairobi, and Johannesburg, even as it earned him enemies in boardrooms from Paris to Washington. Brothers and sisters, here lies the paradox. The same world that doubted is now forced to watch. And in watching, the world must answer a question. What does it mean when a small Sahelian nation dares to do what experts said was impossible? And so the nations watched, some with pride, others with envy, many with fear, but the greatest question remained unanswered. Could the vines of Burkina Faso grow not only into harvests of fruit, but into a harvest of destiny for all of Africa? Brothers and sisters, the harvest has come, but the journey is far from finished. For the desert does not surrender in a single season. It waits, it watches, and it tests. Yes, the vineyards have spread and the grapes have ripened, but irrigation systems still strain under the heat. Water remains the most precious treasure fought for drop by drop. Markets, too, are uncertain. Today, the world cheers the novelty of Burkinabè grapes. Tomorrow, it may turn away, distracted by the next headline, the next harvest elsewhere. And so the road ahead is filled with challenges. The vines must endure not only the desert winds, but also the storms of global trade. Infrastructure must grow. Roads to carry fruit, storage to protect harvests, wineries to refine the raw juice into bottles worthy of the world's tables. Skilled hands must be trained, generations of vintners raised from the youth who today hold watering cans. Yet hear this truth. The struggle is not only about economics, it is about identity. For when Captain Ibrahim Traore raised his glass of vin du Sahel and declared, "This is not wine, this is sovereignty," he revealed the deeper meaning of the vineyard. These vines are not just plants. They are borders drawn in roots. They are flags waving in leaves. They are declarations that Africa's story will not be written only in hunger and despair, but in creativity, courage, and pride. The vision is vast. Imagine, brothers and sisters, a corridor of vineyards stretching across the Sahel, from Senegal to Ethiopia, binding nations together in a living wall of green. Imagine wine tourism flowing not only to Bordeaux or Napa Valley, but to Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso. Imagine young Africans staying, not leaving, because they see a future worth building in their own soil. This is the dream, but it is also the trial. For every vine that thrives, another may wither. For every festival of harvest, there may be seasons of loss. The desert and steppe will not retreat without resistance. And so the question remains, will Burkina Faso and Africa have the patience, the resilience, the faith to see this vision through? And so the path stretches forward, uncertain yet unstoppable. The vines have taken root, but the story is still being written. Brothers and sisters, the question is left to us all. Will these vines become only a symbol, or will they become the destiny of a continent? Brothers and sisters, let us step back and see the picture whole. What began as a single declaration, plant 5 million vines, has become more than agriculture. It has become revelation. It has turned despair into defiance, scarcity into symbol, and sand into sovereignty. The desert once threatened to erase Burkina Faso, grain by grain. But today the nation stands taller because its people chose to plant not only roots in the ground, but dignity in their souls. Grapes now grow where once there was only dust. Raisins and wine now carry the name of the Sahel into markets abroad. And children now grow up believing that their homeland is not cursed but chosen. Yes, the struggle continues. Irrigation must be maintained. Markets must be won. The desert will test again and again. But the greatest victory has already been secured, the victory of imagination. For if a nation can grow grapes at the edge of the Sahara, then nothing is impossible. This is the message to Africa, to the world, and to you, my friends. Do not be defined by what you lack. Be defined by what you dare. The vines of Burkina Faso whisper a truth to us all, that even in the harshest places, hope can root, pride can blossom, and destiny can ripen. So I ask you, do you believe that the story of the desert and steppe can be rewritten by human hands, by faith, by courage? Do you believe that one vine, multiplied by millions, can carry the weight of a nation's future? If you do, then stand with this story. Share it. Speak it. And before you go, let me invite you once more. Subscribe to this channel. Join this community of witnesses, believers, and storytellers who refuse to bow before inevitability. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Would you have had the courage to plant vines in the desert? Because, brothers and sisters, the lesson is clear. When we choose to plant 5 million vines, we are not only growing fruit, we are growing freedom. We are bottling sovereignty. And we are declaring to the world that Africa's destiny will not be written in sand. It will be written in courage.